All right. Hey, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to give it a minute just for people to start logging in. I have found out that it takes a while once we actually start the webinar for people to get into the call. So I'm watching numbers go up, but just wanted to let everybody know I'm stalling for a second here. For those of you who have attended these classes in the past, as always, welcome back. We're glad to have you, especially as spring is almost upon us. And we've got some great flowers here, which is great. It's great to see some color. For those of you who are new to this class, just a couple notes on the class format. This is a webinar instead of a Zoom meeting, which may be what you're used to. So we can't see you or hear you during this class. So if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box on your Zoom menu. You'll see it says Q&A. Just click that, type your questions in, and I'll be giving those to Peg during the class. So quick introduction. Peg has been an instructor and a member of the Merrifield team for many years. She draws on experience from her own garden, which some of you have seen in her past classes. It's absolutely gorgeous. And today she's going to be talking to us about vegetable gardens, which I'm greatly looking forward to. So Peg, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so you can get started.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Beautiful afternoon. We've had some nice warm days, which is great. And we're all looking for color. I know in my garden, my bulbs are beginning. I've got daffodils. I have hellebores everywhere. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an ad or commercial before we get started today. I say commercial because I would like you to know what we have in that needs to be dealt with now or enjoyed now. But I would like to say again, happy St. Patrick's Day also. And I tried to remember to wear a little green today. But we have a lot of bulbs in right now. And I like to use them and to start them indoors because these things will not tolerate frost. Dahlias have become very popular again, and there's so many varieties, and they're beautiful large bulbs in here. And I like to begin those inside because it takes a while for them. They like really warm ground, and our ground is not warm right now. And so if I have a plastic container, fill it with good potting soil, and put my dahlia bulb in here inside and keep it moist. And when it begins to sprout, be sure it has really good light. Then you get a real head start on these dahlias, and they'll bloom a lot early. Dahlias, if you deadhead, will bloom from summer into fall, okay? Another one that I really like to do right away, and I seem to add some in my garden every year, are the Oriental Lilies. And they actually can tolerate cold ground. And so it's good to go ahead and buy these as soon as possible while the bulbs are nice and fresh, and go ahead and plant those in the garden, okay? Warning. Deer love these Oriental Lilies. So I plant them in groupings in my vegetable garden because my vegetable garden is contained with some fencing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any vegetables. And in the background here are lots of bulbs. A lot of people ask new gardeners, do you have the fall planted bulbs now in the spring? And of course we don't. But what we have are those that have been forced by our growers that we buy from and come into us. Now, they will tolerate some cold, but not heavy frost because they're coming out of a greenhouse, but they're fantastic to enjoy outside. And it would be perfectly safe this week to enjoy them outside because there has been no heavy freezing temperatures the last couple of days. And of course we have pansies and violas. Oh, so many of these. And we have the pansies. I didn't bring any of those up. These are the violas. I love violas. They really outperform the pansies. But if you get these in the ground right now, they have been cooled to 38 degrees. And actually, I planted some the other day and just covered them with some of my frost stock when we had 17 in the garden, and they came through just fine. So I feel good about people buying these and go ahead and plant them into the garden. So that's just fine. And there's hyacinths, they're so fragrant. It's wonderful to have those inside to enjoy them. The other thing that I picked up, and we'll sort of start on thinking about this vegetable garden thing today, is I love the fresh green onions. I planted some in the fall. They are up nicely and will probably be ready to begin to pull in about 3 weeks. It would be really nice to go ahead and put in some more bulbs that will follow later. They will come in when these are going out and I'm finished with the first batch, then these will come in and I can use these right into the summer. And I love using the green tops. Garlic. I planted a number of garlic in the fall. And fall is really prime garlic time to plant. However, you can also have pretty good success doing it in the spring. And one that you rarely can get is the elephant garlic. I love this because it's a really, really mild flavor. And you simply take it out and pull apart the cloves and plant them about 3 or 4 inches deep. And then there is the Softneck garlic, which is a good one too, and stronger than the elephant. And there's actually 6 bulbs in here, so you'd have quite a bit of garlic from that one. But here is one of the things that I enjoy with garlic. When you plant it in the fall, the foliage comes up. It's coming up now, okay? Sort of late winter, early spring. I love to use some of that foliage in my cooking, but particularly to rub a salad bowl with, and then mix up your salad with that, and you get that really mild garlic flavor. So these are need to be in the ground as soon as possible. So let's begin the show primarily of what I do in my own garden. That's what most of you hear from when you tune in to me, that is where I worked for so many years and learned a lot of what to do and what not to do, and learn every day. No day passes, I think, that there isn't something learned by sharing, particularly working in this environment. Where we all have different experiences and we can share those experiences. I'm always so pleased when I walk away from our information center where our customers come in, and if they've got a problem or want us to identify a plant, our guys and gals are so good that rarely does somebody go away without an answer, a good answer, okay? Because of the diverse expertise of the people that are there. So let's get out into the garden. Now, you know that little great-granddaughter Clara has been walking with me through these seminars. Little Clara is 3.5 now, and she loves to be in the garden. So a part of that vegetable garden and the things that we can eat and be able to grow ourselves are berries. And my granddaughter, her aunt, Bridget, has these in her townhouse back garden. They've only been in this townhouse for a year, and she inherited a very nice garden. And these raspberries were in the garden. And so Clara harvested frequently from those. So think in terms of not just the vegetables, but can you grow a few berries or some of the other things that we'll talk about when we get to them. Okay, last year, I really enjoyed, I did a really good job planting beets particularly the beets. I'd always done the early vegetables, the collards. And being a deep South gal, I love my collards and turnip greens and lettuce. And it's wonderful to plant the lettuce that it's already growing, and then also plant some from seeds. And you can do that continuous thing with seeds and have lettuce right through the season. As it gets into the heat of summer, the beauty of lettuce is that you can plant in part shade, and particularly if it's shaded in the afternoon, and you can have lettuce all through. Let's come back to me for just a moment, Danny. And we have so many of the vegetables right now that are the cool season plants. They too have been cooled down to 38 degrees. But again, I planted some the other day, and we had that down 78 degree night. And all I did was cover them with my frost cloth. And wow, they came through beautifully. I love this mustard. It's the red mustard. And it not only does it taste good, but it really looks good. If you're growing in containers, you can put one of these in with a lot of your lettuce. And we have gotten in some of the nicest lettuce mixes this year. I'm very pleased with the variety that we have. And so you can start with this. You can grow them in containers, you can grow them in the ground, and then you can also do it from seed. So let's continue. Well, let's go back to that one slide, Danny, because this is what I have done. This was from last year. However, this is what I'm doing right now. Putting in some of these plants that are already growing, okay? And I want to mulch them later. Once I've gotten these in, I can mulch them. I planted some seeds at the same time of some of the lettuce and some of the collards and that sort of thing. I did not mulch that area. I have not mulched that yet because those seeds have to come up first so that I can see exactly where they are and how they're doing. Okay, but this is the beginning. This is how I space those plants out. I don't have a lot of space that has enough sun to grow these vegetables well. And so I sometimes grow them closer than one might think. And the next one, that's a picture of my beets from last year. And oh my goodness, I was so pleased. Not only do I eat the roots, but I harvest the beet tops also. You can even chip those stems up tiny, and they add a lot of color to your salads. So in the next one, once those plants are sort of up and growing, here is how I mulch in the garden, in and about wherever I can. Now, not everything in this garden is in straight rows, okay? Sometimes it's in groupings mixed with perennials and annuals for the birds, bees, and butterflies, and pollination, obviously. I use newspaper. I put down 3 or 4 thicknesses of newspaper. And then I put some of the Virginia Fines mulch on top of that. And that way I have very little weeding to do. And I don't mind waiting a certain amount of it, but I much prefer using my time for something else. And so this is something else that I have just planted. I started these as little growing plants, and you can also start them from seed right now. And this is the English pea, okay? Love to catch it before the pods are really filling out. You can stir fry it, you can put it in salads, or you can do as Clara did last summer, is just stand there, pick it off the bush and eat it right on the spot. I love those things. So by all means, try. These are growing in containers. They also grow well in the ground. They do have to have support. And a wire cage is great for that. We sell the 2-piece, and I think I've got a picture of it in here. But yes, you need to give it something to grow on. And then the next picture, you can call it nostalgia if you want to, but it's so attractive and works so well. And really, I think it also repels some of the slugs and that sort of thing. I don't think they like the roughness of pine needles. But after I have put down that newspaper and put a little Virginia Fines mulch on top of it, I sift these pine needles in through the garden, and it looks so attractive. Plus, I don't have to weed, but I have very little weeding. And also, when it rains hard, you don't get the dirt washing up on those greens. So it's really nice. Now, I did a lot of fun things last year that really paid off, okay? I don't like to encourage people to rush the season too much. Right now, we have all the cool season vegetables in. We've got all the lettuce and the broccoli and the Brussels sprouts and the onions, and we've got all of our herbs and that sort of thing in now because they are cool season. We have not brought in the warm season vegetables yet because they will not tolerate cold soil or cold temperatures. And of course, those two things go hand in hand. I like to grow in containers too. I grow both in the ground and in containers. The container soil warms up much faster, so it is warmer. So late in March last year, I decided to try. I planted on the outside earlier the spinach, and I have never grown better spinach. It was nice and thick and very crunchy. But in the center, I went back and planted in a couple of tomatoes, not in the same pot, okay? This one actually is a pot that's showing a cucumber. And you can see that I have a cage in there already for that cucumber to climb on, because it's best to put it in at the beginning. Okay, but I also put tomato in. Now, I knew that we would have some cold temperatures, and so I used, let's come back to me next week. I used Harvest Guard. This is a very thin product, and it actually increases the temperature by 2 or 3 degrees. And if it's going to be really cold, you could double it, and that wouldn't be a problem. You can put it on if cool temperatures are predicted, and take it off if you choose, but you can leave it on. If, let's say you do this in late March. This is always a trial, okay, when you start something that early, okay? You can put this in place and leave it there for a while. It will warm things up, number one, but also protect it from insects and from other things. Now, obviously, you have to take this sort of thing off when it's ready to be pollinated, because the insects have to pollinate, you know. But this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I can also put it in my garden right now over the area where I planted the seeds, and it will somewhat warm the soil and protect it a little bit, and it'll probably germinate a little quicker. It'll also keep the little varmints from digging into it or the birds from getting to it. So it has a lot of advantages. Now, we sell here something that is called Sod Pins, okay? And this is a very thin fabric, and it can be cut so that it allows for growth inside and pinned down either into the edge of the pot or pinned down into the soil. And these are fantastic to do that. So very little expenditure. It is totally reusable all the way around. and you use it in the springtime right into April, because we can have frost in April. And then you can use it again in the fall. You know, some people actually keep their squash and their cucumbers netted with this to keep the bugs out until it begins to set its flowers, and then you would have to remove it. So let's continue. Okay, another good thing that I had great luck with last year was broccoli. And it was wonderful to have the fresh broccoli. I grow everything organically, so I don't have to worry about any chemicals on this. Now, broccoli can get the little cabbage worms things. In fact, so can several of the other get the cabbage worms, but broccoli is notorious for it. This is a good one to leave the harvest guard on for quite a while before you remove it, okay? But I really did enjoy the broccoli. And then the fresh tender leaves, you can even cook those stir-fried with some of the collard greens and some of the beet greens. It's very, very good. So had great luck with the broccoli. And I think, yeah, spring tops do very well. They do incredibly well in the fall too, but most people don't start them early enough in the fall. In actuality, you should start the plants, seeds in late August and plants in September to get really good production in the fall. Now, here again, here's that tomato. This was taken in April, probably the third week of April, and I had wonderful lettuce all growing at the edges, and I just uncovered this tomato because there was no longer a danger of frost, and it produced so early. I wouldn't want to go through that with a whole lot of tomatoes maybe, but it was surely nice to do it with a couple of them. And I would say that the first week of April will be a good time to do that, okay? Now, we need to always think about the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay? Well, we strive to have a garden that is good for pollinators, good for the birds, the bees, and the butterflies, because we have a lot of habitat disappearing for those little creatures, and they're very beneficial. Yes, we have some that are not beneficial, but actually the good ones far outnumber the bad ones. I love parsley. I love to cook with parsley. I love to put it into my salads, and I love to have some extras because the swallowtail caterpillars will devour a parsley plant in short order. And I love to have those. I love to support the caterpillars of our butterflies. And in the next picture, Danny, this is the one that shows people how I use that frost cloth. And you can see that the sod pins are there. Now I would push those all down firmly against that frost cloth. I left them up so that you could see what I was doing. But if you're going to leave it on for a period of time, you need to be sure that it's nice and loose, because it's so lightweight, it's not going to weigh down your plants. You don't have to worry about a hoops underneath, and you can just let it lie there and the plants grow along with it. So in the next picture, I think that's a little, this is what I did with that tomato. I covered it all up, and then I planted the lettuce around the edge that you see visible there, because the lettuce was not included in that frost cloth because it was very frost hardy. And then you saw the results, what it looked like. It was great. And in the next picture, I'm thinking of Bob Warhurst, co-owner of this place that passed away about 3 years ago, didn't he? Yeah. 3 or 4.
2015.
Was it really that long? Oh my goodness. This is something that he came up with, was a 2-part tomato cage. And the wonderful thing is that you can put it on. If you forget to put a cage on, you can put it on because it's two pieces. You can also turn it into a little arbor thing that you can grow cucumbers or things up with. It not only is it good for tomatoes, but it's good for any of the vining things. And then, because I have deer and I use Bibex to repel them, and it works really well, but it does nothing for the late fall rubbing of the antlers of the male deer. And so when I have used these in the vegetable garden, because they're in two pieces, I take them and put them around the most valuable of the small trees, because I lost a lot of things. I can't cover everything. I've got too many things. And thanks to the deer, I'm having less things every day. Okay, in the fall, really, because they're bad. All right, here's another one that I would encourage you to add to your garden, and that's figs. And last year was a magnificent fig year. Now, if you have varmints, which I had squirrels or something going after these things, I highly recommend that when they're coming in and beginning to ripen, don't seem to bother them until they get almost ripe. Cover them with this harvest guard, or cover them with the narrow, tiny deer fencing, so that you get to harvest these things, not the varmints. Okay, so figs are a part of your garden and a part of our food chain. And in the next picture is my blueberry bushes. I love the blueberries. Now, in my vegetable garden, the pH of that, I think when we tested it recently, was 6.5 to 6.7, which is ideal for most vegetables, not potatoes, but most vegetables. But that is not what the blueberries like. So you want to be sure you plant those where the soil is more acidic, okay? Or you will need to acidify it, one or the other, okay? In the next picture, I borrowed this picture from David Yost because he used an earth box. I have never grown in an earth box, but he liked his very much on his deck, and he grew beautiful tomatoes. I forget how many. He harvested off just 2 plants on his deck in earth boxes. And then around that, he grew a lot of basil because he enjoys using the basil, as do most of us. And now basil is very frost sensitive. And so if you buy it now, do not put it outside, and do not get into too big a hurry to plant it outside. What you can do is plant it in a container inside where it gets really good light, and then put it out when the temperatures have warmed. Talking in terms of the warmer temperatures, think about soil temperature as well as the temperature of the air, because these warm season plants like basil and tomatoes and squash and cucumbers and that sort of thing like warm soil. So it's not just the air temperature, it's also the soil temperature, but they pretty much go hand in hand. When it stays pretty cold up here, it's pretty cold down there too. Okay, but starting the seeds. Now I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I have done in the past and a few others, but I want to say that here is what I do, because the space is somewhat limited. I like to do a few things that start early. Let's say I want to be sure I buy plants of a number of these things and get them going, but I want to buy the seeds also and plant those perhaps at the same time. Let's say you've got a squash plant that's growing along nicely. Then in a week or two, plant a few other squash seeds so that you'll have some later. So that's what I like to do. Then you've got that flow and that continuity, even from a very small space, just in containers. All righty. Herbs. Got to have my herbs. Herbs take the place of all the fatty kind of things that I grew up with. Everything was fried in those days. And now rarely do I fry. Now I don't stir, I better back up from that. I stir fry stuff, but that's different than deep frying it, okay? But I love to use the herbs and I like them to be as close to the house as possible. My vegetable garden is quite some distance from the house. And so I found that I would rarely take the walk back there every night to pick fresh herbs. And unfortunately, I lost a couple of really large oak trees in my backyard, which let a lot more sunshine in. And this area gets at least 6 to 7 hours of direct sun. So things thrive there. And this is a grouping of all the herbs that I enjoy using in my cooking. And there's at least 15 different containers back there because there's oregano and there's different kinds of thyme. Oh, I love my lemon thyme. And chives, sage. I grow nasturtiums and I grow violas and pansies in there because they're edible and they're wonderful garnish. I love the flavor, by the way, of the nasturtium, particularly, you know. So herbs in containers are fantastic and near the house. Now in the next picture, and you all have seen some of these pictures before, some of you, because I only did this once. It was a fair amount of work because of the number of deer that I had. But I grew all of these vegetables at the end of my driveway, which was where I got a lot of sunshine. And this was before I lost some trees that gave me more sunshine in the back area. But I grew beautiful tomatoes. I grew lovely squash and cucumbers and I did them on trellises. Now they are in large pots, okay, large containers. I also grew some flowers among it. I even grew some sunflowers. But I did discover that I had to back that area with the deer fencing because the deer were going after my tomatoes, particularly. They don't like the herbs, but they'll reach their neck over something they don't like to get to something they do. I read so often, oh, plant this around your tomatoes or your whatever, and they won't eat them. Well, my deer do, okay? They don't seem to care if they're walking over lavender to get to whatever they want to eat. So anyway, I grew all of this in containers, and I was thrilled with it, but I didn't want to fight that deer issue anymore. And so I did the deer fencing in the back area where I had a lot more space and did a lot in the ground as well as some things in containers. And you'll see some of that space right now. This is again, in the early years, we grew a lot of vegetables here. But then as time went by and the trees grew and the roots of the trees grew, I got less and less sunlight and it changed up somewhat. I began to grow a lot of perennials that would tolerate that situation. And then I discovered as I lost a couple of trees that things have changed and things do change in your garden. And so I began to mix in first all the leafy vegetables because they tolerate a lot more shade. It's amazing how well your lettuce and all these green leafy things will do and grow deeper into the warmth of summer because they might have some shade during the day. And so it worked really, really well. And into that, I already had planted a lot of perennials, a lot of vines. There were some roses back there, clematis as you wish. And I began to reintroduce the tomatoes and other things. In this picture, you see a line of parsley because I love parsley. You're seeing a strawberry jar that doesn't have strawberries in it. It has a sage growing out of the top, and then it has nasturtiums and calendulas. All of those things are edible, and they make beautiful garnish. And besides that, they make the garden beautiful. So I've begun to mix in more and more things. And in certain areas, I love to have plants that I can cut and bring into the house. But these are all great pollinator plants. So I have a small section where I will grow zinnias and celosia, and particularly the salvias. And so this is such a good thing because it brings all of these birds, bees, and butterflies into that garden. And because it's bringing those, I'm going to get much, much better pollination of my plants. Plus, they're going to eat the caterpillars, and they have to eat something, you know. So that's okay. We have to share the caterpillars with them. And then this was another view. You know, I did a TV show for many, many years, and we did a lot of filming in the garden, and it was such fun because I really was forced to keep it up better than I do today because it was on camera, okay? So this is the other end, and it's showing you the shadier end, but this is a really old-fashioned rose. I have no idea what the name is, but the neighbor gave it to me when he sold his property. It was being developed in that area. And it was at least 20 years old. And now this is 40 years into that almost. So that plant has never been sprayed, never has a problem. Blooms only once a year, but it's spectacular when it does and very fragrant. And I wish I knew what the name was. But anyway, it's great. We have great roses that pretty much fit in that category today too. So climbers, it's a climber and I love it. And also foxglove. Foxglove is the tall, spiky one that you're seeing there. And that's a biennial. But it's a fantastic plant too. I grow a lot of marigolds and a lot of nasturtiums and calendulas, but particularly nasturtiums and marigolds because they're so bright. They bloom all summer long. And as I said, they're just great for pollinators, but also for putting into your salads and just make a beautiful salad, okay? Now, I'd like to share a couple of other places other than my own garden, okay? I've done very little traveling in the last couple of years, so this is before that period. Well, part of it's from last year. I'd like to encourage you to visit some public gardens because now they're finally back open again. This one is Dumbarton Oaks, which is in Georgetown. I highly recommend that you go to Dumbarton Oaks. Call to see what the hours are because I really don't know what they are right now. But this was their vegetable garden when I was visiting there 3 or 4 years ago with one of my granddaughters. And it was spectacular. This was probably in June or July, maybe July. And they were growing so many things. I was amazed to see how really big their cabbage was great. And the nice green plant that you're seeing to my left is asparagus. And if you have the room, asparagus is fantastic. It takes 2 or 3 years to get an asparagus bed established, however, so you don't plant it today and eat it tomorrow by any stretch, okay? Dumbarton, Dumbarton, Dumbarton Oaks in Georgetown. And then last year, a couple of my daughters and grandchildren went to the White House. We were invited for some event or other there. And it was fun to see the vegetable garden. This is what Michelle Obama started several years ago, and it was beautifully maintained. A lot of it was raised beds, but not everything was a raised bed. But of course, beautifully maintained. It would be really nice to have somebody maintain your garden, wouldn't it? But I thought that was lovely and on display there at the White House. And then on another trip a while back, the Garden Center group actually visited this place, Chanticleer, on Long Island. About the middle of Long Island, actually. There's no, I'm backing up. I'm thinking of another garden now. Chanticleer is outside Philadelphia. Okay, outside Philadelphia, I correct myself. And they did things with herbs and vegetables that were unique. This is a hanging basket that's filled with herbs, and I think there's Rumex in there also, all harvestable. And then in the other deep containers, all of these containers hold a lot of soil. That particular hanging basket was probably a minimum, it was probably 16 inches. Now that's a big basket. And it had something heavy duty holding it up, because you have to have something heavy duty if you've got a 16-inch basket filled with soil. But the small baskets are difficult for vegetables because there's just not enough soil in them. The 10-inch, the 12-inch, that sort of thing. You've got to go 14, 16, 18 inches to get a really good basket like this. And then you can, they actually stuck some willow pieces into that, and willow will grow almost anywhere. So it takes root right away. And I thought it was just a wonderful background. They say presentation is everything. And I thought that this was the greatest idea of presentation, because it's got all those beautiful willow branches and then a lovely tile art, piece of art. And the containers are interesting, but even I'm very fond of just terracotta pots, but even they would be beautiful here. So this was one way that they used their vegetables, but also the other one is unique also. Danny, let's do the next one. I thought this was fantastic. These hoops are used for their bean vines, climbing beans. It could be used for any vining thing, but this was a vegetable garden still. And so they had vegetables growing at the base of those, and then up through those were growing the beans. And across from that, that isn't quite as visible, are some really large containers that also have beans and vining things. And they're vining up onto really heavy sticks, like brown sticks, okay, that you've cut and put in there for that purpose. Actually, I enjoyed doing this, and I did that with my early peas, the English peas or the snap peas, if you sugar pod peas, they're called by many things. Into the cage that I put around those, I cut branches and stuck inside of there, because I knew that they would branch out a great deal, and I wanted to direct how they grew. And that worked just beautifully, because the stems were held up nicely by the rigid cages. And it was beautiful and so easy to harvest from. So I encourage you, whether you're doing it in containers or doing it in the ground or near your home. And I know that there is a lot of ideas out there about even using your front yard. And I do believe in using your front yard for whatever purpose your family needs it, okay? because I used to laugh. The gentleman who was a wonderful friend and great horticulturist, Andre Viette, used to say, you pay for your real estate, why don't you use it? Well, I do feel if you decide to put a vegetable garden in your front yard, and there are a lot of HOAs won't allow that, but if you did, to be considerate, and when the tomatoes are finished, and when the cages are finished, that you take it down, because it is not attractive when it's dead. And I think we need to have our gardens function, but I also think that we need to consider our neighbors and be sure that we are tidy with it. So I encourage it as long as you're tidy. Now, to wrap it up finally, and Sally, then hopefully we'll have time for just a few questions. But I began with little Clara. I began all those years ago with my 4 children. And not many people stay in the same place for 60 plus years, but we have. And the garden evolved along with the children. But they all know and love fresh vegetables and flowers and appreciate nature. And then along came the grandchildren. And they did the same thing. They were with me in the garden. They helped me in the garden. One thing that I never did was send them out to a heavy duty weed patch. Not many kids like to weed, okay? Maybe for a short period of time, if you're doing it with them, and that happened, but not for expensive periods, but they do like to help. Now I have these 2 little granddaughters, and little Lydia was just beginning to walk last summer, and now she's getting around quite well. So I know that she is going to enjoy that garden very much also. But they, in their townhouse, they put in a couple of raised beds, and they have some containers, and that's what they're growing in. And these little ones are loving it, absolutely loving it. And we need our little ones to love it. Okay. Sally, I think we've got time for a few questions.
Yes, we do. And quick reminder to everybody, just send those questions into the Q&A box. If we don't have time to get to your question today, feel free to hit the reply button on your confirmation email. You can send follow-up emails to myself. That email goes to me, and then I can share them with Peg. Okay, so first we're going to take a quick jump back to the bulbs. If people want to purchase those bulbs that are already blooming, when they're done, can they plant them in the ground immediately and leave them there, or do they need to do something else with them?
Absolutely encourage you to put them as soon as the blossom has finished. Take away the stem and plant the bulbs. Now, all that being said, we know that the tulips don't have the longevity that all the other bulbs do. However, these have been nicely fertilized, and they are nice and green foliage. The time to fertilize bulbs, and I recommend you buy Espoma bulb tone, is very good. This is the time of the year that you need to put down a little fertilizer on your existing bulbs in the garden. And after you've enjoyed the blooms of these, you simply cut away those blossoms and plant it right away. Incorporate a little bit of bulb tone in the swell, and chances are pretty good, because you're fertilizing it. It will use that fertilizer as long as this foliage is green. And if you do that, there's a good chance that you'll get another year's bloom out of the tulips. Now, with the other plants, it's much more likely that you'll get continued bloom. For instance, with the narcissus, this one is one of my favorites. And in the garden, it's one of the later blooming varieties. And it is a daffodil and narcissus, but a narcissus is not a daffodil. Okay, they're all narcissus. But this one is cheerfulness, and it's very fragrant. And if you enjoy these blooms, which last quite a period of time, because you see it has different buds on here, when one is gone, another will take its place. By all means, you can plant that out in the garden. Now, I put a lot of bulbs in the fall beneath my violas and pansies and various things that I grow for over winter, and they're just coming up now, and they will bloom well in those containers. And you can include this in a container outside if you want to, knowing that you're going to lift it out and plant it in the garden as soon as it has finished blooming. Yes, but it is important to fertilize at the proper time because it needs that green foliage to use up that fertilizer. So as soon as you see the green foliage coming out of the ground, and this is optimum time to do it, go ahead and just, if you've got leaves, pull or mulch, pull it back somewhat and just scatter it around the bulbs and then pull your mulch back over it again. So highly recommend that, okay?
Okay, that's great information. Thank you. Next question. Can zucchini be planted in containers? I have some containers that are 20 inches in diameter.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And 20 inches will take care of a zucchini plant. Yes, ma'am.
Great. Okay, next question. Okay, so this is from someone, they like to do container gardening on their back deck, but it gets the afternoon sun, and her cucumbers got fried last year despite her trying to keep them watered. Are there any vegetables that grow that you would recommend growing in containers that get that afternoon sun?
Well, most of these vegetables love hot afternoon sun, okay? And of course, when you are growing in containers, you have to consider the size of the container. The lady mentioned a 20-inch container. A 12-inch container is not big enough. 14 is stretching it. You need to go 18 and above to have enough soil to take care of those plants. And then, of course, you need to be sure that that soil does not dry out, okay?
Okay.
It should tolerate that afternoon sun as long as it doesn't dry out. Now, I utilize saucers, and I need to talk about some of the issues that people have or think they have with saucers. Number one, in the heat of summer, when you're watering, that saucer will fill. And so it's going to be more effective with that watering. People say mosquitoes might breed in that. Well, yes, they would breed in that if you kept water in it all the time. But I never do because it evaporates, it's used up and or it evaporates before the mosquitoes have time to get into it, okay? Because of the heat. Now, I do not take those saucers out in the wintertime. I get far too many containers to bring in. And so most of them have to stay out. They are always slightly elevated. They never sit on the ground because if they sit on the ground, number one, the drainage can get plugged up. But number two, they absorb the moisture of the ground and they can crack. I really have very little breakage. I get some now and then because I leave them out over winter. But these are big containers. And I know a lot of people like to put something in the bottom. Some people use crushed plastics and so forth and then plant on top of it. And you can do that. You know, people have done that. I prefer not to. I prefer to, even in large containers, I prefer to have soil all the way down because you would be amazed how far those roots go. And that helps a great deal with the watering also. So I don't stack stuff inside of there. What I do is I have a little truck. I call it a truck. Is there, Daddy, would there be anything else? You know, the little truck you put under a pot to move it around? Even a dolly, that's a better, well, I also call it a truck, but a dolly is a better word, okay? It's nice to have one of those on hands to move any size container for me at this point in the game. But I do recommend using soil wherever you possibly can, into the bottom, okay?
Sounds good. All right, next question. Do you have a type of time that you think is best for growing in containers?
I think most of the time grows extremely well in containers. Perhaps a better question for me is what time plants, which varieties do I use more in cooking? And I know there's French thyme too, which is just a slightly different fragrance. And so if you're a French cook, you probably would reach for that. But the one that I reach for most is the English thyme and the lemon thyme. There is a variegated lemon thyme that is just delightful. I love to just feel it and smell it when I walk by, in addition to cooking with it. But not only that, it's just beautiful in the container. And by the way, when you are planting your lettuce or planting, I love to include at least one of these in my containers right now. But look at the textures and the colors that are in there. But then add a viola or two to that. Now you've got blossoms in with those colors and the textures, and the viola is the pickup of the color, okay? So it works so well. And then you can eat the violas, you know? I love it. Love it.
Thanks, Meg. Next question. Can you explain a little bit about how the two-part tomato cages work?
It's very simple. They are made in two parts. They're not inexpensive, but they last for years and they're easy to store. They are made in two pieces. They're really big and they have hooks on this side and the hook on this side, and you just start them into the ground and hook them together. It's just really easy. And then you grow your tomato, you grow your peas, you grow whatever you put into it. And then when the season's over, you either take it apart and then take it apart, just do this to unhook it, put it together, and it's so easy to store. And or you reuse it, as I do, to put it around my Japanese maples. There's something about a deer that absolutely knows which one of your plants are the most expensive. You know? That's the one they go after.
Of course it is. All right, next question. If someone's dealing with a more shady garden, what types of vegetables do you recommend? I know you mentioned like the lettuces are a good one. Are there any others, or are there any particular lettuces that do best?
Well, a lot depends upon what's casting the shade and how deep is the shade. Okay, if you're trying to grow things under maple, now I'm not talking about Japanese maple. I'm talking about the big, tall, big trees, maples, especially the Norway maple. But because their roots are very surface oriented, and it's difficult to grow anything beneath them. But if it's oak trees like I have, or if it's the smaller trees, like the understory trees, the dogwood and so forth, you need to respect the root systems of those trees, because the roots are closer to the surface than you might think, even with a big oak. However, you can do packets of things, and all of the lettuce do well there. All of the green crops do well there. In the fall and in the spring, not necessarily because of the heat in the depth of summer when it's really, really hot. Green beans, I have had pretty good luck with, the bush beans particularly. As long as they get 4 or 5 hours of direct sun, I think I would try to grow maybe beets and celery. I love to grow celery because I like to cut even the tips and the branches. So try some of those things. Tomatoes, squash, those things don't do terribly well unless they get usually a minimum of 6 hours of direct sun.
All right, thanks. All right, so we're about out of time, but I've got a bunch of people have sent in questions about containers. So I'm going to ask one more question. Well, technically two. First question is, what type of soil do you use when you're planting vegetables in containers? And then the second question is, do you have any favorite vegetables that grow really well in containers that you would recommend to anyone?
I've tried just about all of these in containers, and it has worked beautifully for me. And would like to remind them, Sally, that 2 weeks from today, I will be talking about container gardening for the early spring things. And Andy is going to come on with me and talk about some of the containers that are available to grow in. So I think that that will be helpful. That's 2 weeks from today. But yes, potting soil wise, there's some really good potting soils out there. Of course, I'd always recommend our Merrifield Garden Center potting soil. If you're totally organic, that one won't be for you because it has a polymer in it, and that polymer is not organic. The one that I reach for first is Fox Farm, and it's fantastic. I really like Fox Farm. So yeah, but there's some other good ones too, okay? But that's the first one off my lips.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much for that information. All right. So we're about out of time for today. Thank you so much, Peg, for doing this class with us. We will be sending out a recording of this tomorrow to everybody who attended. Quick heads up, if you find you're not getting these emails, we've got a couple of I've been getting a few emails from people who have Yahoo email addresses and they don't seem to be getting them. So just send me an email. You can reply if you find you're not getting your coupon. I will send that to you personally. For anybody who's interested, we're doing a class on lawn care with, sorry, that's my dog. She's angry that she's not in here. We're doing a class on lawn care with David Yost at 2 p.m. today in an hour. So feel free to email me or go on our website and sign up for that. And he's going to be focusing on weeds, like weed prevention for lawn care and weed control. So feel free to join us for that as well. Peg, thank you so much again. We appreciate it. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
And don't forget your frost cloth. It is March.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.